Hi guys. So today I wanted to talk to you about a very tragic story in our history, and it revolves around somebody by the name of Vincent Chin. Now, he was a Chinese American engineer who was beaten on June 19th, 1982, and died on the 23rd after being in a coma for 4 days. Now, he was killed by two white men, Ronald Evans, who was a Chrysler supervisor, and his laid-off auto worker stepson, Michael Nitz. Now, I bring up their jobs because it was a significant contributing factor to the killing. So let's just talk about what led up to the event. In 1982, the US auto industry was sustaining losses in profits and sales due to the success of the Japanese auto industry. American cars were huge, they were big gas guzzlers, and Japan's fuel economy cars were growing in popularity. Now, this was coming off of the heels of the 1979 oil crisis, where gas shortages due to the Iran Revolution drastically raised the price of crude oil. So on the night of June 19th, 1982, Vincent Chin was out celebrating his bachelor party with friends because he was getting married, right? And while he was out having a good time, he got in a fight with Evans and Nitz. Now, they apparently assumed that Chin was of Japanese descent, and they are alleged to have used racial slurs as they attacked him. They blamed him for the success of Japanese auto industry, despite the fact that Chin was of Chinese descent. Now, after the fight had moved outside, right, and Evans went to his car and he grabbed his baseball bat and then began chasing Chin. But then he ran away. Now, Evans and Nitz then drove around for about 20 minutes looking for him. And when they found him, Nitz held Chin while Evans beat him to death with a baseball bat. Chin was taken to the hospital, where a nurse told one of his friends that he was brain dead, and he died of his injuries 4 days later. Evans was arrested, taken into custody at the scene of the crime by two off-duty police officers. Now, they witnessed the beating. They watched this man beat Vincent Chin's head in with a baseball bat. So Evans and Nitz were only convicted of manslaughter after a plea bargain brought the charges down from second-degree murder. They served no jail time, and they were given 3 years probation, fined $3,000, and ordered to pay $780 in court fees. Now, at the time, government officials, politicians, and several prominent legal organizations generally dismissed the theory that civil rights laws should be applied to the beating of Vincent Chin. The Detroit chapters of the American Civil Liberties Union and the National Lawyers Guild did not consider Chin's murder a violation of his civil rights. The American Citizens for Justice, ACJ, was the only group which lent its support to the theory that the existing civil rights laws should be applied to Asian Americans. In a response letter to protests from the ACJ, the judge presiding over the case, Judge Charles Kaufman, said, quote unquote, "These weren't the kind of men you sent to jail. You don't make the punishment fit the crime, you make the punishment fit the criminal." Now just let that one sink in for a second. You don't make the punishment fit the crime, you make the punishment fit the criminal. Now, this was 1982, not that long ago. Now, at the time, Detroit was a powder keg of racial animosity towards Asian Americans, specifically because of the Japanese cars in the US auto market, which sped up the decline of the Detroit Big Three: GM, Ford, and Evans' employer, Chrysler. Now, resentful workers like Michael Nitz also blamed their layoffs to the Japanese competition. So over the next few months, ACJ and other groups around the country protested the sentencing and petitioned the US Department of Justice to investigate Vincent Chin's murder as a civil rights violation, which they did. Now, Renee Tajima Pena, a professor of Asian American Studies at UCLA, states, "It was the first time Asian Americans were protected in a federal civil rights prosecution." And goes on to say, before that, Asian Americans were seen as not being a protected class. Now, Vincent Chin's murder marked a turning point for Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, and other communities who hadn't previously thought of themselves as Asian Americans with common interests. Now, people knew from personal experience that they were being lumped together as a monolith. But the galvanizing point was that the Asian community understood that a man was killed because his murderers thought he looked like a different ethnicity. And to make matters worse, in 1984, the U.S. District Court sentenced Evans to 25 years in prison for violating Chin's civil rights. Evans then appealed and received a retrial that cleared him of all the charges in 1987. Also in 1987, Evans and Nitz settled the civil suit out of court. Nitz was ordered to pay $50,000 to the Chin estate, which he did over the next 10 years. and Evans was ordered to pay 1.5 million, which grew to an estimated 8 million as it went unpaid and accumulated interest for decades. And like I said before, both men never served a day in prison. Now, Vincent Chin was buried the day after what would have been his wedding day. And with all the horrible recent news that has been overwhelming our televisions and phones, I think it's important to continue to support civil rights organizations in order to protect minority groups against these kind of injustices.